Yo, 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 what's going on, guys? It's Buns. Welcome back to the Road to Gladiator. Tonight, let's talk WoW PvP, the Wheel of Warcraft. The Wheel of Warcraft is Legion PvP itself. Now, going into this expansion, everyone was very excited about PvP because there was a lot of promise and a lot of new changes within Blizzard's system to be able to frequently make updates to how PvP will work. And this was being able to specifically go into the PvP stat templates, adjust classes' stats as their stamina, agility, intellect to be able to increase or decrease to help certain specs out that would not affect PvE. So these PvP specific changes could now be put into the game, and PvP players were very excited about this because in previous expansions there wasn't a lot done for PvP because in a lot of cases it would change what was going on in raiding for World of Warcraft, so they felt that they couldn't always make these changes up to date. Now, one of the good things that I will say so far in this expansion is that they have been very much using the system and have been making a lot of updates and frequent updates. But the question really is it a good system, and are we abusing the system and not letting it play out for itself? And we'll dive into that a little bit later in the video. But where I really want to start first is breaking down what is the Wheel of Warcraft. The Wheel of Warcraft is a wheel, basically, of all of the specs in World of Warcraft, and you spin it. And the catch is that in the past in World of Warcraft, these patches and these changes didn't happen nearly as often. But so far this expansion, there have been a ton of changes on weekly updates and also on hotfixes that have come into the game. There have been a ton of updates, which I do think in the long run is good for World of Warcraft. But I think right now, Blizzard and the whole World of Warcraft community is just so trigger happy to use it that we're just seeing changes all the time. Now, to give you guys an example, at the very start of the expansion, and I'm going to do it for PvP the arena season on the 20th of September, a lot of the classes that were on top of the top dogs in PvP were frost mages, fire mages, assassination rogues, but as things kept going, they would make adjustments. They would make adjustments and be, okay, this spec's really strong, we're going to tune it down a little bit. And then another spec would pop up. Then it would go into Ret Paladin, Enhanced Shaman. You see demo locks creep out, coming towards tournament plays as the EU regionals and the US regionals play out. And now, with 7.1 coming out just a few days ago, you see completely different classes just dominating, like Frost DKs, Destruction Warlocks, Moonkins, and even mages again have kind of creeped their way back up to the top with getting some significant buffs. So the question is Blizzard giving the World of Warcraft player base enough time to be able to work through the challenges of the meta and be able to figure out how to deal with certain classes cooldowns and what defensives need to be rotated, what offensives need to be used at certain times? And really the answer is no. But towards the end of 7.0, we finally did see that point where people were figuring out, hey, if we're playing against an Enhanced Shaman, we need to be able to kite his Bloodlust, CC them during the Bloodlust, or have a Purge available to get it off. Another cooldown example as well too, Vendetta. You need to have Bops or big bubble cooldowns, huge defenses ready for Vendetta. As a third cooldown, or not even a cooldown, but casting circle, I guess, is another thing for Demonology Warlocks. Teams were figuring out how to deal with that, whether or not it was stunning them up when they had casting circle down, using some sort of movement impairing ability like Death Grip or Typhoon or something to get them out of their casting circle to be able to interrupt them from channeling that, or just straight up line of sight them. It's important for Blizzard to give the community enough time to be able to work through these challenges before we just completely go ahead and change it week to week. Now, I want to take a moment to talk about the pros and cons of being able to actually access the PvP templates and the stat templates for the entire World of Warcraft community, because overall, as I said at the beginning of this video, I think it's a huge positive for people playing World of Warcraft PvP that the game developers can go in and change the spells, change the stat templates, because it allows them to have some control over the specified area of PvP to make adjustments when need be. But the real question is this kind of came as an upfront false sense of security that we were going to see a lot of changes and that we were going to be able to have balanced PvP. But in reality, it's quite the opposite, and it's kind of brought out the control freak in everyone in World of Warcraft PvP, because now that we have this template in place, and now that Blizzard is actively changing all of these different classes and specs to try to balance things out, and whether or not they're nerfing a class or whether or not they're buffing a class, they're making the changes so frequently that things never really settle down. And you see that everything is getting very influenced by social media, and it's getting influenced by a lot of different platforms such as Twitch, the forums, YouTube, honestly, even the tournaments themselves. And just from looking at like 7.0 by itself, I really think that 7.0 in the last week or so, even though there were definitely some strong classes like Demonology Warlocks, Assassination Rogues were still very good, Ret Paladins were also strong as well too, we kind of went like a step backwards, I think, with 7.1. And one of the things that I want to talk about, in my opinion, that I think is really bad for the game with making changes in World of Warcraft PvP is your double nerfs and buffs. So with that means we're going to take specs that are already strong and nerf them, and then we're going to take specs that are weak and give them buffs. And in a lot of cases, that's really bad for the game. And what happened going into this patch, 7.1, a lot of the strong classes got nerfed, and I would say deservedly so. And some classes that really needed to see a buff also got buffed. But what happened is rather than doing one or the other, it's like there's so much pressure on Blizzard now that they have this system in place. They're getting pressured on the forums. They're getting pressured by a lot of people that have big names in the community, whether it's Twitch streamers, YouTube streamers. There's a lot of influence that people feel like they can have, right? And you've probably seen a lot of different videos or guides or tutorials or people talking on their streams where they're saying, hey, I'm going to make a video to kind of give my input and impact, and maybe we can get some changes done. And really the catch to this whole situation is Blizzard is listening, and almost maybe listening too much, because these changes are happening so fast and so frequently that the meta is not really able to settle for itself. I think that we saw maybe the last 2 weeks of 7.0 where it kind of stabled out a little bit. And even though when you would queue into a 3v3 game, a lot of times you'd get into the games and it would be hit or miss, and you would kind of know before the gates open if your comp was at an advantage or a disadvantage. It did have a more rounded out feeling again, but now 7.1 has rolled over again, and classes have just completely gotten flopped on. Other classes have gotten massive buffs that just seem overwhelmingly strong right now, with Destruction Warlocks and Frost DKs reaping in probably the biggest benefits out of all these classes. So what I want to bring up as one of my big points is that when we're going in and making changes to World of Warcraft PvP, we've got to recognize that there's appropriate times where it is okay to nerf a class that is very strong, and that's completely fine. One of the classes that's been completely nerfed this expansion has been Rogues, and they've received a lot of nerfs, especially Assassination, and respectively so. But something that throws the game off and out of loop, for example, is when you take a class and you nerf it, but then you buff another class through the roof. And it seems like if you could do one or the other, that it would actually end up being a much better atmosphere, and you wouldn't see these completely 180 flips of the wheel where classes that were very strong just go to the bottom and classes that were very weak go to the top. Like, for example, in 7.1, DKs really were not the best outside of really a few comps like Windwalker DK. They're in very select comps. Now you see DKs just every part of the ladder. I mean, I don't think that I've queued 3 games in a row in the past 2 days of playing 7.1 without seeing a Destruction Warlock or a Frost DK on either team. It just doesn't happen. And that's always going to be a part of World of Warcraft where people are going to play Flavor of the Month. That is what it is. People want to play what's the strong spec so that they can be competitive and give themselves the best chance for doing well in PvP. There's nothing to be ashamed about that. That's just how World of Warcraft PvP has always worked. It's just this case scenario now with Legion that this wheel is just spinning all the time. And the funny thing is that it's being controlled by way more than just Blizzard. And that's what I'm talking about. People are actually having an influence, and Blizzard is letting that happen. And I think that in a lot of case scenarios, it's really unwarranted and unnecessary information. And that's why you're seeing this wheel, just everyone wants their hand on the wheel to spin it and get their class into the top. And it's kind of this frenzy now where, okay, we come into the expansion, everyone's excited about this, they're ready for the PvP templates, they are excited that there's going to be changes to abilities in PvP so that the classes can be balanced, but then everyone wants to dip their hand into the cookie jar and be like, hey, well, why hasn't my class seen a buff? Why is this class so OP? And we're just seeing that so much, and Blizzard's actually listening, which I'm not actually sure is a good thing, because these changes are happening so fast and so dramatically that they're not actually letting things settle. And I guess that's the main point of why I wanted to make this video, the Wheel of Warcraft, because it just keeps spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning, and we haven't actually got a chance to really let it settle down. And I think that we were kind of getting to that point in the last week or so of 7.0, but it just got completely flopped on its head again in 7.1. So this is just my opinion, and this is how I feel. I have a few things that I want to suggest and give my opinion on for what I think could help out make some more beneficial changes long terms using the system for World of Warcraft, because I do think it's a great system. I do think Blizzard is doing a good job making changes, and they're doing it frequently. I just think that they have to understand what's good for the game. And in a lot of case scenarios, I think my biggest concern right now is the double buffs or the double nerf buff, whichever way you want to look at it, where you take a class that's really strong and nerf it, and you buff a class that's really weak and give it huge buffs. So like this week, I could give you some perfect examples in 7.1 of classes that had this happen to them. Rogues got destroyed. They saw, anywhere from 10 to 20% stamina nerfs with agility nerfs, which was warranted, absolutely. I mean, rogues are very strong. I play rogue, absolutely, very strong. But then you also saw classes just got buffed out of the wazoo, like DKs and warlocks. And it just, when you have those kind of big influxes, it's like you would like to see one or the other happen, because then I don't think you see this huge 180 shift, right? When you kind of get both, because it goes like this, it throws everything completely out of whack. And I think if you see one or the other, so like, let's say that you could really do it either way. You could nerf rogues and not buff warlocks, but I really think realistically that that would be probably bad for the game, because I feel like that destruction warlocks did need a buff, and I feel like that would be good. So I think that the better case scenario would have been to keep kind of rogues where they're at, keep frost and fire mages where they're at, and also buff the classes that needed a little bit of damage buff. But instead we're kind of doing the 2-in-1, and when we do the 2-in-1, it really shifts the tables. It's very dramatic, and this is something that's been happening very constant and consistently throughout the expansion. And really the concerning thing is, more than anything, is it really seems that Blizzard's listening, which sounds weird, but at the same time too, they're listening too much and they're getting opinions from a lot of different people, and it doesn't seem like they're really like working through these tests a lot when they're making these changes, for good or for worse. Some of these changes, there's been a few that have been definitely good, and I like seeing them doing changes. I'm not going to sit here and like nitpick people for, how to play the game and how they should do it. It's not my job, and we all play World of Warcraft. I'm as passionate about World of Warcraft as anyone. It's my favorite game to play. So it's always finding that right balance of, what can we do? And I think that the first thing that everyone needs to do about the Wheel of Warcraft, take your hands off the wheel. People need to stop touching things. We need to let the meta sit for a few weeks before we touch things, right? Let's put some changes into the game, right? Let's buff a few specs. I'm a big fan for that. Try things out. But then let's take our hands off for like more than a week and see what happens. Because I really thought that 7.0 was in a pretty strong place. And now you've flipped it on its head, and now we're seeing like a completely different meta. And I would say that 7.0 was a lot better than 7.1. The games that I've been playing the past 2 days have literally been lasting 30 seconds. Like the average game I've been playing has been won or lost in 30 seconds. And you just see frost DKs, you see destruction warlocks, just huge burst damage. And now one thing I'll say as well too is that I do like seeing the burst damage, but it's coming too strong because we're buffing things and we're nerfing at the same time, and it's creating this influx. Whereas if you do one or the other, it makes things a little bit more stable, and it makes your tests be like, okay, well, let's just buff warlocks and keep other classes where they're at and see how they fit in the mix now with these changes, rather than let's go nerf mages, rogues, shamans, rats, all these other classes that were strong, and then buff these classes. It's like, what do you think's gonna happen? So This is definitely a rant video, but it's something that I really wanted to talk about because I think it's a huge problem in World of Warcraft. And with the system that they have in place, there needs to be something said about it. There really needs to have this conversation. And we need to give ourselves the opportunity to let go of the wheel. Let players figure out for a couple of weeks, how's everything looking? Let everything sit. But instead, we're so trigger happy to get on the gun and call, make sure that our spec's on top. And it's not all necessarily Blizzard's fault, but I do think that when these changes go through, that we have to take our hands off of the wheels. And even in a case scenario like the hotfixes that went out today, right? Let's let this sit, even though it looks bad right now and it definitely doesn't look good. Let's let it sit for a while and see if people can figure out strats to accommodate for it. Let's see what ends up happening in a few weeks, right? I think that we just have to pull back a little bit, because in the past, where I think you see these changes happen over maybe like 2 or 3 months and then things shift up a little bit, which I would say is a pretty long period of time. We're literally seeing like week to 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 week, a new class up on every single day and week. What spec is on top of the wheel? And it's just getting to the point where we don't have any stability and you can't really get a feel for how things play out. And you have to kind of relearn almost every single week what's going on, what class on top, what do we need to do to counter this. And I think that that's bad for the game. I do like change. I'm a fan of change, but to the point where we're not letting things settle and stabilize before we're having all of these influxes thrown out there that are biasly getting changed and not really thought through. I feel like it's very much like media based. It's like, what's happening in tournaments? Oh, we're going to nerf this. What's happening on YouTube and Twitch? We're going to nerf this. People are talking about it. Let's nerf this. So I know that this sounds redundant, but it's a conversation that I really wanted to have, and it needs to be had sooner than later because the opportunity is now. We have the tools in place to be able to make a huge change with World of Warcraft PvP, and sometimes having the biggest impact is actually letting the game and the community play it out itself. So what I'm going to say is, and this is something that, it kills me personally right now at a time where we've just seen so many dramatic changes that have really flopped everything on its head. Blizzard, let this sit. Please let this sit for at least a few weeks before we go in and make some like massive changes again, because the same exact thing's going to happen. And I think that right now, all these little kids, that's what I would call the World of Warcraft PvP community. You got all these little kids reaching in for the cookie jar, trying to get out their cookie and pick out their class and show it to Blizzard and be like, hey, pick me, you know what I mean? And we gotta let that stop. That has to stop for the game to actually stabilize and be more successful, and for people to create a meta and figure out how we work through this and figure out comps and be specific, work through the challenges of, going against the follow them comps and how to beat that. Because almost always people are creative. People find out new ways to combat against all odds, pull out a comp that does counter it, figure out through that situation, but not if we're changing it every single week and dropping it on its head. So this is a rant I really wanted to talk about, and I think for the Wheel of Warcraft right now to slow down, we have to take our hands off the wheel. And not just Blizzard, also as a community as well too, because we can obviously see that Blizzard is listening. They are listening. They're going to the forums. They're making these changes so fast, and part of this as well too, ultimately it really does, at the end of the day, go on Blizzard for whether or not they decide to make these changes. But as a player base as well too, let's see if we can sit down and figure out how to work through these challenges. Let's see if we can figure out what comps are going to work. Because right now, if we just keep spinning this wheel, it's not good for anyone because the meta doesn't actually settle itself and it just keeps spinning and spinning. Anyways, guys, that's going to wrap it up for me here. This is a conversation that I feel like needed to happen, and for us to really see the game stabilize and have an impact where the community can figure out and work through comps and how to combat some of these strong classes, we're actually, as an entire World of Warcraft community, we've got to let our changes sit for a few weeks so that the player base can work through them and have enough time to figure out, is this something that's really overpowered? If it is, now we have a better idea because more time has elapsed for how to change this rather than just making all of these off the top of the dome changes and feeling like that they're going to have a really big impact, because they're not. The changes are not stabilizing the game. They're just creating an influx where the wheel keeps spinning. And that's always going to be there, where there's always going to be certain classes on top. You're never going to have perfect balance in World of Warcraft. But at this point, we just have to take our hands off the wheel and things will slow down. Once again, thanks everyone for watching the video. I'm out. I will catch you guys on the live stream in the afternoon. Keep it easy, everyone. Peace. Later, guys. Yo, what's going on, guys? It's Buns. Welcome back to the Road to Gladiator. Today I'm going to cover the 7.1 patch notes, as there is a lot of new information and changes on the table, and I'm going to give you guys a little bit of an update for some of these changes